As soon as I did that, the look on his face changed. His shoulders drooped and his head dropped as he let me drag him away. He seemed dazed, as if he didn't know what to do. It was almost as if for a moment I was the father and he was the son. When I told him we'd better hop the next freight, he just nodded and led me across the yard over to the track where they were putting together a line of empty boxcars. We climbed into the last empty reefer humped off the main, me taking care of him. We ride the roof for a spell until the heat of the sun begins to get a bit much for us. Pop looks over at me, raises an eyebrow, and looks down. I nod. The two of us walk along the top of the boxcar till we are over an open door. Side by side, we both lean over to look inside. It's occupied, but there's plenty of room, like circus acrobats. We each get a good hold and swing down to land light on our feet inside the car. "Whoa," says the beau, closest to where we land. He's a man who appears middle-aged, with a neat little goatee and a clean white shirt. "Who might you gents be, falling from the sky like the winged Mercury himself?" His voice is pleasant, and there's a bit of chuckle in it as he speaks. Before Pop can answer, a second man, bone-thin, with pants so short they leave his shins exposed, and a cigarette dangling from his lips, speaks up. "It's Injun Joe," that man says, his voice raspy from smoking. "Injun Joe?" I look over at Pop, who's now staring straight at the thin smoker. "Bony," Pop says. That's all, but it's enough, especially when Pop uses that dangerous tone of voice. The thin man takes a step backward, plucks the cigarette from his mouth. He holds his arms out to the side, looking even more like a skeleton when he does that. "Sorry," he rasps. "Didn't mean nothing by it, Will. No offense?" Pop says nothing. He turns to the older man with the goatee, holds out his hand. "Professor," he says. "Nice to meet you." "Railroad Will," the professor says. "Couldn't make out your visage, turned away as you were when you came catapulting in, but I should have discerned it from the dramatic manner of your entrance." Pop smiles, looks toward me. "You haven't met my boy, Cal." I shake the professor's hand. His grasp is firm, but he's not trying to prove how tough he is by squeezing till it hurts. I make eye contact for a moment, noting how clear and blue those eyes of his are, how amused they look because of the way Pop put Boney in his place with a single word. I'm glad Pop did that. There's no way anyone should ever link my father with one of the worst characters in that novel by Mr. Twain. Injun Joe, indeed. How could anyone ever picture my Pop as a murderous, drunken half-breed? "Pleased, sir," I say, as I let go of his palm and step back. My, the professor says. "Quite the conversationalist, are we not?" Then he chuckles. "Take not my jesting in the wrong light, my lad. I am, indeed, pleased to meet you as well. Any son of your father's must be worthy of respect." Pop rests a hand on my shoulder. "The professor," he says to me, "was indeed that before the war, a professor of literature. But now," the professor adds, "I am but another foot soldier in the growing army of the unemployed, one who found his place in the university taken by younger men." The professor looks at me again. "There's the bright light of intelligence in this lad's eyes," he says. "Correct me if I am errant in my judgment, Will. You could say that." Pop replies, a bit of pride in his voice. "And quite the reader, never without a book in his bindle." "But not in school," the professor says. Pop shakes his head. I know that bothers him at times. "A boy as smart as you, Cal, there's no limit to what you might do with the right education." That's what my father said more than once in the time we've been knights of the road together. Then, what Pop usually does is just shake his head and say, "Someday, somehow. But I guess you're okay for now." However, that is not how he answers the professor. Instead, he says something that surprises me. "Lately, Professor, I have been thinking about a way to remedy that." I look hard at my father. "Remedy that? How?" "My school is closed and gone forever. And from what I know of schools, They're for those who live near them, people with homes, not folks always on the fly. People with money go to school, not hobos. It makes no sense. But Pop says not another word, and, as always, I do not attempt to break his silence. We settle into one corner of the boxcar that's shared, in addition to Boney and the professor, by 3 other men. None of them know Pop, which is not all that surprising. There are so many of us riding the rails these days, not just hundreds or thousands, but millions. I lean back against the boxcar wall, combing my hair. The thrumming of the rails makes the wall vibrate against my back. The sound of the steel wheels beneath me is as familiar as the babbling of a brook is to one who lives by a stream. Pop's next to me, his shoulder warm against mine. His familiar scent is comforting to me as we lean against each other. It's a mix of wood smoke and soap. His body odor, even when he's all sweaty, somehow always smells clean. I close my eyes and start counting backward from 100, as I always do at night. I'm asleep before I can get to 90, comforted by the sound of my father breathing beside me. Next thing I know, I am back home. It is time for breakfast. I can smell Mom's cooking downstairs. It's bacon and eggs, toast made from bread she baked yesterday. My bed is so warm and comfortable that I don't feel like leaving it. But now, for some strange reason, it's vibrating under me. There's a sound of rumbling and rattling. I'd like to keep sleeping, but that grub sure smells good. A light tap on my toe wakes me. Pop is leaning over me. I'm no longer home. Back at that house that's no longer ours. Back when Mom was still with us. I'm on a train. I feel sad for a moment. The dream that took me over this time was gentle, a place I'd rather not leave. But it's gone now. Gone is that home where we were a family of 3. I push it away, beyond the back of my mind. A man can't live in what's past. It's not real dark inside the car now. The moon's shining in through the open door. As Pop pulls me up, I see another light coming from a corner. The flame of a portable stove, little but big enough to fry up whatever it is I'm smelling. Fried potatoes and bacon. The professor, the apparent owner of both stove and pan, is bent over, stirring the mix. Care to share some of this repast? He asks, as we walk over to where he's cooking. I nod my head. I'm always hungry these days. Because I am growing like a weed, Pop says. Pop holds out his banjo, the little frying pan he carries in his bag along with the trenching shovel. The professor spoons out a pile of steaming hot bacon and fried potatoes. I'm pretty sure the potatoes in the pan were my father's contribution, given him by Ms. Euler. Pop and I pull out the metal spoons we always carry and dig in. Before I know it, we're scraping the bottom of the pan. Only the 3 of us share that little meal. The other 4 in the car stayed in their corner. Add to a meal, you get to share it. When you don't, you don't, unless you're truly in dire straits. Rule number 15. Help your fellow hobos whenever and wherever needed. You may need their help one day. The professor and I wash our food down with water from Pop's army canteen. Boney and the other beaux are passing a small bottle around, but Boney knows enough not to offer it to Pop. My father does not object to the drinking of others, unless they get so liquored up as to be bothersome, but no alcohol ever passes his lips. I make a pillow out of my coat and lay next to Pop on the wooden floor of the car. There was a time when we first took to the road months ago when sleeping on a hard surface was not easy for me. I'd been pampered too long by having my own bed, but my body got used to the change, plus being outdoors in the fresh air makes sleep come faster to a man. Now all I do is close my eyes and listen to Pop's breathing. With him by my side, it's easy to drift off to slumberland. I wonder, just before I fall back asleep, if that dream of home is going to come back. I start counting. 100, 99, 98. When I open my eyes, it feels like no time's passed at all. But it has to have been hours. Dappled morning sunlight is streaming in through the open door. That tells me we are heading southwest. Pop, sitting next to me, has that newspaper open and is reading it. As always, I've opened my eyes a crack. Nothing's moved but my eyelids, so I do not think he knows I am awake. As I watch, he reads and then rereads the page he's holding up in front of him. He's looking at it so intently that it seems as if his eyes might burn a hole into it. Washington, Pop says in a whisper. He lowers the paper. You're awake, he says. I sit up and nod. Good, he says. Remember Joe Angelo, son? I told you about him last year. I nod again. I have a good memory, as Pop knows. Joe Angelo was a vet. Like Pop, he survived the Great War. Mentioning him might mean Pop's about to share more memories about being over there. This will be the second time this week that my father has decided to talk about the war. He doesn't do that often, but lately it seems to be on his mind a lot. Met Joe in 1918 after the big battle on the Meuse-Argonne line. He was in the 327th Tank Division. When their commander, George Patton, was wounded, it was Joe who dragged him to safety, patched him up, and then ran Patton's orders from one group of tanks to another. Pop puts aside the newspaper he was reading. Then he reaches into his pocket to pull out the folded article he carries there next to his compensation certificate. I've seen it before, but Pop wants me to look at it again. I unfold it carefully and read the headline. Veteran, wearing medals, jobless, stirs committee. Below it is the picture of a skinny man wearing his army uniform. Serviceman's cap on his head, 8 medals pinned to his chest. His face is thin, starved looking. His eyes are huge, dark, and haunted. He just testified, Pop says, in Washington, D.C. to the House Committee on Ways and Means, which was considering whether us veterans could take out loans against our compensation certificates. Joe walked all the way from his home in Camden, New Jersey. Took him 3 days on Shank's mare. Pop takes the article back from me, reads what Joe Angelo said. I come to show you people that we need our bonus. I represent 1,800 men from New Jersey. They are just like myself, men out of work. I have got a little home back there that I built with my own 2 hands after I came home from France. Now I expect to lose that little place. Why? My taxes are not paid. I have not worked for 2 years and a half. Last week I went to our town committee and they gave me $4 for rations. Pop looks at me, biting his lip. Sound familiar, son? I nod. Pop shakes his head, makes me feel as if I ought to do something. If one Joe Angelo could stir those congressmen, what about 10,000 of us? All of us in Washington. And asking nothing more than to be treated fair and square for the sacrifices we made. Joe told them he was making good money, $1.25 an hour at the DuPont Powder Works. But he chose to enlist, not drafted like some, for army pay of $1 a day. Pop folds the article with the care of someone folding a flag. He slips it into his pocket and lifts up the newspaper. His lips are pressed together as he looks at it. We rattle on for another 10 miles or so. Then he turned it toward me so I can see the headline. Vets marching on D.C. Washington, he says, tapping the newspaper with one finger. Men like Joe and me are going there now. Vets asking for a fair shake. They figure that if enough of us show up, Congress and the president will have to do something. They'll have to give us our bonuses, and me too. Pop's voice has been getting more excited as he's been talking. He looks straight at me and says that name. Washington. Says it like a magician chanting abracadabra before he pulls a rabbit out of his hat. Washington. Me in Washington? Can you imagine that, Cal? I don't say anything, but I can. I have one of those rare moments when I can sort of see the future. There are all of those soldiers marching down Pennsylvania Avenue. Pop is marching with them. But I don't see me there. Yes, sir, Pop says, bringing me back to the present. Yes, sir. His voice is softer. He's talking to himself now. That's it. I need to join my brother soldiers. One last campaign, one last march. His mind's made up. Once Pop decides on something, nothing stops him. Not hell or high water. And now I am feeling excited too. If Pop is going to Washington, I'll surely be going there as well. Me taking care of him taking care of me. Washington, D.C., I've never seen that place, but I've read about it and it sounds wonderful. the Capitol building, the big memorials, the White House, all sorts of museums, and the nation's biggest library. But then Pop lowers the paper and looks straight at me. The expression on his face has changed. It's no longer excited. It's thoughtful. Son, he says, I have been thinking. The tone of his voice has changed too. It's serious in a way that worries me. Now that I am going to Washington. Now I am confused, especially because of the way he emphasized the one word I, not we. I say, Pop, won't we both be going? He shakes his head. No, son. If this is going to be a campaign, then I have to go it without you. It might be dangerous, and I want you safe while I'm gone. It'll be me and other vets doing this. It's time for you. He pauses, looking out the door at the trees and telegraph poles whizzing by. The trains going over a rough spot in the tracks. The two of us rocking back and forth with the motion of the boxcar. What, Pop? I asked. Time for what? School, he says. I have been thinking about this ever since we hit the road. It's not right, you missing out on schooling. You need to get back to being educated, Cal, and I know how to do it. That confuses the dickens out of me. Back to being educated. Back to school. I cannot imagine any way on God's green earth that can be done. The school I was going to is closed. No other school is going to take in a hobo boy just hopped off a freight train, nor do we have any money for such things as books and school supplies. And where would I live while going to school? It makes no sense. How? I say. Then, because I am feeling so totally befuddled, I say it again. How? For some reason, that makes Pop chuckle. Exactly, he says. He lifts his head to look straight at me. Then he does something strange. He holds out his left hand and strokes the back of it with the fingers of his right. He's done sign language before, especially when it's been necessary for us to keep quiet. Like when we're hiding from a railroad bull, sign language comes in handy at such times. But what he just did was a sign I haven't seen before. I don't understand it. It's not like lifting his index finger up and dropping it down for yes, or holding out an empty palm for no. I don't know that sign, Pop. He smiles, strokes the back of his hand again. It means Indian, he says, pointing out how Indian skin is darker than that of a white man. Indian? Then he holds out his hands, side by side, open palm up. That's a gesture I understand. It means book, but I still cannot grasp what he is telling me. Finally, as if it explains everything rather than making me even more baffled, he says two words: Indian school.